Hi, my name is Kevin Thomas, W1DED. Today I have with me Clint Sprott W9AV. I've got Clint in my log at least 15 to 20 times. He seems to be on the air constantly, as evidenced by the award within Parks on the Air that's named in his honor, the Bailey Sprott Award, that goes to the people that activate a park every day of the year. And I think there's only about 4 or 5 contenders in 2023. Clint Sprott was one of the 2 people, I think the other person was Ken Bailey, that actually did this in 2021. I think without even being aware of it, but we can talk about that later. But I actually asked Clint to join me today to talk about the upcoming Parks on the Air Plaque Event, and we'll get into that later on. Clint, thanks for joining me.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Kevin. I appreciate your having me.
So I always love to find out how people got started in ham radio. So let's start with that origin story. How did you get started?
Well, I was interested in technical things for as long as I can remember as a little child. And my dad had a friend who was a ham radio operator, Whiskey 4 Fox George. And my dad arranged for me to go and see his station. And it was literally a shack out in his backyard in Memphis. And we crowded into this little tiny room with wires and radios and electronics everywhere. And he got on the air and called CQ 20 meters on AM in those days. This was 1952. I was about 10 years old. And someone in Australia came back to him. And that was amazing. Now, of course, this was a time before the internet and cell phones and jet airplanes. And talking to someone in Australia, he might as well have been on the moon as far as I was concerned. And so I was totally enthralled, and especially by this shack he had with all homemade equipment, with relay racks that ran ceiling to floor with great big vacuum tubes that lit up and glowed red. I'm sure he was running a kilowatt, if not more. And I decided I needed to be a ham radio operator. And so a year or 2 later, in 1954, it was, our local ham radio club put on a class for for prospective hams. It was when the volunteer program just came into being, when you could get take your test from a volunteer examiner. And so I got my license. It came in in January of 1955, a novice license. It was KN4BOM. And at age 12, and all through my teenage years, this was my big hobby. And I worked DX. I got DXCC. I went and got an amateur extra license, which at the time had no extra privileges, but I just thought it was fun to collect licenses. And so ham radio was my entry point into physics, which was my eventual career. And I went away to college in 1960 and wasn't on the air a whole lot during college and grad school and subsequent job on the faculty at the University of Wisconsin. But in retirement in 2008, I got back on the air in a big way and got back into contesting and working DX and eventually Parks on the Air.
So I'm curious what that initial early shack looked like when you were a teenager I'm presuming your parents' basement. What did you have for equipment?
Oh, my shack. Yeah, it was in my parents' basement. And I started out with mostly homemade stuff I built out of the amateur radio handbook. At least the transmitter. I had a moderately good receiver. I had an SX100 Hallicrafters when I was a teenager. Santa Claus left it under the tree one year, probably when I was about 14 years old or so. But I built a lot of my own equipment, and we used war surplus transmitters. The ARC-5 or BC-459 was very popular. You could buy them for $10 and convert them to work on the ham band. And eventually I got a Heathkit DX100 and built it. And that was my serious rig during the last few years as a teenager before going away to college. And that's how I got the DXCC and worked lots of stations back in those days. But I was mainly a builder. I like to build electronics. Something I've gotten away from a little bit recently.
I love that ham radio brought you to your career and actually started an educational path. And I believe you went to MIT and you have some expertise in plasma, physics, and chaos theory. Is that correct?
Well, that's right. Yeah, I kind of stumbled into it. Well, at MIT, I didn't know quite what my future was going to be. I found myself immersed with a bunch of guys, and they were mostly guys in those days, uh, who were a lot smarter than I was. So I didn't know whether I had what it would take to go on and have a career in physics. But I got admitted to grad school here at the University of Wisconsin. They actually admitted me on probation because my grades weren't all that great. But I had good recommendations from people that had seen me work in the laboratory at MIT. And so I stumbled into a professor in plasma physics who was working on nuclear fusion, something that's very exciting right now, because after 50, 60 years of effort, it looks like it's now going to come to be within the next few decades, making unlimited energy through the nuclear fusion process. So I worked on that for about 25 years, and then I got interested in chaos and nonlinear dynamics. And this was things I could do just with a computer. Didn't need a lot of hardware, and it was. I was an early adopter of personal computers, so it was an easy way to mesh my interest in computers with my interest in physics, and that interest goes on even today. And I just finished writing my 14th book, mostly on things related to chaos and nonlinear dynamics. And I'm still doing some research in that area, but at my own pace, which is something you can do in retirement.
So before I steer the conversation back to ham radio, I also have to mention a program that you've done, I think, for 4 decades, over 340 of them, a program called Wonders of Physics. I stumbled upon this on YouTube and had to watch it. And it was fascinating. You could tell that you're a passionate entertainer as well as a brilliant physicist. Tell me about that. How did you get started creating Wonders of Physics?
Well, if you want to see my hair slowly go from brown to white, you can watch 40 hours of the Wonders of Physics. Every year we produce a video. But the way I got started, I kind of stumbled, like so many things in life, I stumbled into it. The people in the chemistry department had been putting on a public show every Christmas. And I went to the show one year because I'd heard so much about it. And it was obvious that we had way better demonstrations in physics than what he was doing in chemistry. And so I said, well, maybe I'll try that. And so with a very minimal of advertising, we advertised a show just of interesting physics demonstrations. And I put it on that first year, and the room was packed, a room that seats 300, and we had to turn people away, and they were sitting in the aisles, and just from very little publicity. And then, of course, everyone said, when are you going to do it again? I hadn't really thought of ever doing it again. It was supposed to be a one-time thing. But I decided to wait a year and do it again and try to have some new demonstrations. And, well, one thing led to another. And eventually, in recent years, we've been doing 10 shows a year, filling the 300-seat lecture room to capacity every show. And I've recently handed it off to someone else. So my involvement with that is going to be minimal now going forward. I'm 80 years old, and it seemed like the right time to be sure it's in the hands of people that can carry it on when I'm not around anymore, although my health is just fine. I can't deny the calendar.
Well, if any of our viewers are interested, they really should Google Clint Sprott, Wonders of Physics. You'll see those YouTube videos, and it is a fascinating performance and obviously well responded to. There's several shots of the audience, a lot of kids in the audience, so great job with that. So let's talk about Parks on the Air Plaque Event. This is new for this year. Prior to now, the Plaque Event has been part of Support Your Parks Weekend. And this year, 2023, there is a new date, June 3rd through June 4th, where it's dedicated to the Plaque Event as an opportunity for ham radio operators, both Parks on the Air activators and hunters, to compete for awards. You've been active with the Plaque Event prior to this. Tell me a little bit about your experience with that and what you see this year's event to look like.
Well, it's another thing I stumbled into. I didn't know there was a Plaque Event the first year I think they put it on, but I had always been interested in contesting, but my station was never adequate to win any serious contest. So that's a little bit how I got into Parks on the Air, because it's not a contest. and you can have a lot of fun working people all over the world and collecting awards for your own benefit. But I did miss the competitive aspects of things. And then COVID came along, and of course, the sunspots were down a few years ago. And so there weren't a lot of DXpeditions. And so I was running out of DX stations to work and wasn't doing all that great in contesting. And so I just stumbled across the fact that POTA had plaques that they were giving out for the summer Support Your Parks event. And the first thing I noticed was that the winner of the digital award had won it with 27 contacts over 48 hours. And I said, well, this is going to be easy. I know I can get a few hundred contacts with no problem. So the next year I put on a really serious effort. I'm mostly a hunter, by the way. By the way, you said something wrong. The Bailey Sprott Award, there are actually two Bailey Sprott Awards. One is for activators, one is for hunters. I've definitely not activated every day of the year. In fact, my activations have been from a single park and only in the good weather during the summer, and only just a few weekends a year. So, yeah, I do have the Bailey Sprott Award that I started was for hunting, but I've always enjoyed being an activator, going all the way back to national parks on the air, where I did almost 100 activations of, I think, 57 national parks. But that's a lot of work, taking equipment out into the field and working from a car or from a picnic bench or something. And so it happened that my wife and I, my wife, Whiskey Charlie 9 Romeo, we had bought a house, a cabin, it really is, on the Wisconsin River, which is about 50 miles away from my home QTH in Madison, where I am now. And it happens to be adjacent to the Wisconsin State Riverway, which at the time was not one of the state, was not listed in the state parks. The POTA was not one of the official POTA state parks. But I had been having a lot of fun loading up a canoe and camping out on a sandbar out in the middle of the river with a portable Honda generator and working a whole weekend contest from a sandbar. And eventually it occurred to me that, well, this really should be a state park. So I contacted Jason, W3AAX, and I said, can I get this included in the list of Wisconsin parks? Well, this was a time when it was easy to do such things. In fact, I think it was the last park that was entered into the system prior to a lapse of something over a year, because they were getting lots of requests, and he nicely put this one in and then shut the door. So, so I realized that I'd been doing activations all along in what eventually became a state park in Wisconsin. But it was a lot of work taking equipment to a canoe out to a sandbar. And so I discovered that the Wisconsin Riverway actually extends 75 feet back from the riverbank along 92 miles of the Wisconsin River. The Wisconsin River is, I think, the biggest or longest or most significant river that's all within one state. It starts up near the Upper Peninsula of Michigan and drains into the Mississippi down near the Iowa, Illinois, Wisconsin border. And so it comes right by our cottage out on the river. And so it was easy for me to set up on the riverbank and literally carry the equipment from our cottage down to the riverbank, where I would set up a tent and work the plaque event. So once I realized that there were nice plaques and that I could had a pretty good shot at having the high score in the digital activator, I put out a real serious effort. What was it? I guess 4 years ago now, to get the digital plaque. And so I set up, I think, at least 2 radios. Probably I had 2 radios at the time, and did SO2R on the riverbank in a nice tent with comfortable, nice place to sit and good lighting and all of the things that makes it fairly easy to work a 2-day weekend. And I could go back to our cabin and sleep for a few hours every night. So I worked something like 40 hours with 2 radios, and I forget, over 1,000 contacts easily. And so I did win the award for the highest digital, but to my surprise, I got the highest award for the most number of contacts. So I won 2 awards that first year. And then, of course, the competition built up. And so then I wanted to keep doing it. In the second year, I won the digital, but I didn't win the most contacts. And I discovered only a year after that, the reason was that some of the activators were activating from twofers. All the contacts are counting double. And so it had never occurred to me that one could do that. And my location was not conducive to that. So I didn't have that advantage. So I was very delighted when a group of people in POTA decided that twofers shouldn't count. And I was actually asked to be on the committee to develop some new rules about the plaque event, which a number of us wanted to make into a more serious contest. And so one of the things in that effort was to divorce it from the Support Your Parks weekend. And I was actually the one that suggested we do it in early June because it's midway between the spring and the summer plaque events. It is beautiful weather here in Wisconsin. Summer only comes to Wisconsin in kind of the middle of May. So I usually do field day in late June. And every year I'm always thinking field day should be a few weeks sooner because the weather's so nice, the bugs haven't come out. And so I thought the early June would be an ideal time, and everyone quickly agreed to that after looking at the contest calendar and seeing that we don't compete with much of anything. I think the Kentucky State QSO party goes on that weekend, but not a real biggie. And there's also an international ARRL digital contest that goes on that weekend. And I thought, oh, that's perfect. Those of us who like to do digital POTA will have lots of people to contact. And so that was also kind of in the back of my mind. And I didn't think we'd be a serious conflict with another digital event. So that's kind of how it came about. And I'm excited for it to happen. I'm gearing up already to set up a tent and do it again this year.
So what I could see from the statistics, as the competition has increased with the plaque event, you're still up there in the top 5. I think maybe last year overall QSOs you might have been at may have placed number 4. So you're keeping up with the competition.
Yeah, I think so. And I think once they get rid of that double counting of the twofers, I think I have a shot at being number 1. But I don't want to get ahead of myself. The competition is heating up, no question.
So I think it's a great thing that there's more and more people getting involved. I'm looking forward to it. I think portable operating is well, speaking for myself personally, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun to take your gear outside and deal with the challenges of setting up in the field. And the idea of doing it over 2 days is going to be a lot of fun. So tell me what your plans are specifically this year. I presume very much like in the past, but tell me what that looks like.
Yeah, well, I'm going to do what I've been doing the last couple of years. I now have 3 radios that I put down there. And that came about because I also do field day down there. And one year we had 3 operators, and so I wanted 3 radios so we could all operate. But then I realized that I could do a single operator with 3 radios if at least 2 of them are on FT8. I do a lot of FT8, and so it's pretty easy to just glance over at the screen, and all you have to do is click after somebody answers your CQ. And even SO3R is pretty easy with 3 radios. You just have 3 computers sitting side by side, and you sit there and keep clicking. And so that's my plan, to set up as I have done in previous years with 3 radios. I tend to dedicate one to each band, so there's not a lot of band switching involved. Do have to switch between modes because I'm going to do things other than FT8. I'll do CW and phone as well, but I'm not really shooting. Well, I'm just shooting to beat my last year's score, basically. I think I had 1,800 and some odd contacts last year, and I'm just competing against myself and hoping that it'll get me a plaque. I'm not planning to win the phone or the CW contest. I think the people who travel from park to park, have a certain advantage over those of us who sit at one park for a weekend, because every time they pull into a new park, they've got a new pileup. Whereas after an hour or two on phone, I've worked almost everybody who wants to work me, and then the pileups die down. Of course, on FT8, you can keep things going because you can work people that are not POTA people, and so that's nice. So it's going to be 48 hours in a tent with, if it's last year, 4 hours of sleep each night up at the cottage, which is literally just a 2-minute walk from where I set up the tent.
So Clint, tell me about the antennas that you'll use this year.
Well, let's see. The antenna I've always used has been a 20-meter ground-mounted vertical with about 8 radials that I just lay out along the ground, 16-foot radials. And it's an adjustable, it's an MFJ 16-foot adjustable antenna. And so I can tune it for any of the bands, 20 meters and higher. But I also have ropes up in the trees where I can erect a 40-meter dipole, which also works pretty nicely on 15, the third harmonic. And I also have an in-fed half-wave 80-meter antenna, which basically works on all the bands. And I just recently, well, last year I think it was, I put up an in-fed an off-center fed 20-meter dipole, which works on 20 and 10. So I have dipoles now for 10, 20, 40, and 15, and an in-fed for 80 meters. Not expecting 80 meters to be very good, except in the middle of the night, now that we're getting some sunspots. But anyway, those antennas go up really easily because I've got ropes that I can pull them up quickly, and have used that for field day as well.
So it sounds like you're not doing any antenna switching when you're operating. You have specific antennas set up for specific stations.
Yeah. Well, when you're doing SO3R, you kind of have to have the antennas dedicated to the radios. And so when I move over to sideband or CW, I will just move from one rig to another without a lot of antenna switching. And of course, the interference between two nearby stations is an issue, which I think a lot of people have asked me about. How do you manage to run 3 radios with antennas that are all just a few feet apart? And it is surely an issue. Fortunately, on FT8, you can run all of your transmitters on the same time slice. So they're all transmitting at once and they're all receiving at once. So you can get away from all of those crosstalk issues on FT8. But as soon as I try to do CW or sideband, of course, I'm not good enough to do SO2R on either CW or sideband. A lot of people do that very successfully, but that's above my skill level. But I do need to have filters when I do that. And some combinations of bands work better than others. But I have coax stub filters on the antenna that's on 40 and 15, and another coax stub filter that's on the antenna that's on 10 and 20. And so those pretty much isolate those 2 radios enough that I can do, for example, 20 meters and 40 meters simultaneously. If I'm doing, for example, FT8 on 40 meters, I can perfectly well run CW or phone on 20 meters. Now, it doesn't always work, and so I have a collection of Dune Star bandpass filters, one for each of the major bands, and I can put those in as needed. And we'll see. Sometimes I find them useful. Sometimes I find I can get away without them. So we'll see.
And Clint, what about logging? How are you logging your contacts?
Logging. Yeah. Well, I use for contesting. Well, okay. My general log is the N3 FJP amateur amateur radio log, but I don't use their contest logs. I prefer the N1MM Plus for contesting, and I've been doing a lot of contesting since I retired in 2008, so I'm pretty familiar with the N1MM. So that's what I use. The hard thing, for me at least, was getting WSJT-X and N1MM talking to each other. And I also use JT Alert to alert me when, for example, when someone calls CQ Parks on the air, I'll get an alert, an audible alert. And I also use it, well, a long story. But anyway, N1MM is perfectly capable, and in fact, it's quite easy to network a bunch of computers with N1MM. You just click on networking and you click start networking, and it somehow manages to know how to do it, assuming you haven't set up a firewall or something that keeps it from happening. But once all that is taken care of, it just works. You know, N1MM was set up by a bunch of DXers and contesters and DXpeditions, where they really have to have a bunch of computers networked, and everything has to work smoothly, and the logs have to be secure, and it works nicely. So I found that very easy.
And are you on Wi-Fi at your location, or are you using a hotspot? How are you getting Wi-Fi?
Yeah, well, I have a router there, just like you'd have at home, a Wi-Fi router, and I can connect the router to each of the computers with an Ethernet cable. But I thought with the Wi-Fi router, just literally 2 feet away from the radios, there's really no issue with running Wi-Fi. And it does eliminate some ground loop issues that you might have if you try to tie a bunch of computers together. I have taken steps to try to isolate the computers with individual grounds to, and the computers are sort of like separate stations, that there are no wires connecting one station to another. And so that's in an effort to reduce the amount of crosstalk that I get between them. You can also network in 3FJP, and I have done that, but I certainly like contesting better with N1MM. It's really made for that application.
Well, I can guarantee you I'll be making a follow-up phone call to you, because I intend to operate 2 radios, and I've been trying to figure out how best to do this. I use MacLogger when I'm in at home. I use Hammers when I'm in the field, and I've been using N1MM Plus when I'm doing remote contesting. So I'm all over the board, and you've pushed me in the right direction. I think I need to figure out how to use N1MM in the field, but I'll be calling for some advice.
Okay, well, I can't help you much with the Mac. I'm really in a Windows world here.
Yeah, no, I'm gonna leave the Mac where it is. That'll stay. I've been using that with my Kenwood at home, and I like it. I mean, it's what I started with, and I happen to have a Mac computer, but I've moved to PC with the N1MM that I use for contesting. I just need to now get a laptop that I can take out into the field. You had a good recommendation this morning, a $200 Lenovo. I probably won't find it for that price, but I'll start looking.
Yeah, it's interesting. About probably 6 years ago, when I started doing Parks on the Air, and in fact, before the National Parks on the Air, I wanted a cheap laptop that I could use in the car as well as for a portable station. And so I just looked around at what was a highly rated laptop at the time that wasn't brand new and expensive. You know, a state-of-the-art laptop can run $1,000. And I just wanted something cheap that would do the logging and would interface with the radios to track your frequency and mode, which is very important if you're a serious contester, and also to run CW macros and voice for that matter. You know, I have everything interfaced, so the computer will call CQ POTA on voice or on CW. And of course, FT8 will do that automatically. But I just looked around at recommendations for laptops that were kind of 10 years old or so, that were still serviceable, that were refurbished. And I homed in on the Lenovo T420. Was actually, I think, the last version of the Lenovo that was built before IBM sold the Lenovo brand to the Chinese. And various people had said the quality of the computers went down a little bit once they started making them over in China. So, so I bought a Lenovo T420 for about $200, and I just loved it. It was rugged and it did absolutely everything I needed. And so I started buying them because I had more and more stations, and I actually have two stations, one out at the river, a fixed station out there, as well as the portable stuff that I do, as well as another station in Madison, which is my home QTH, Wisconsin. So I had a lot of need for laptops, and I can remote control any of the computers from any of the locations. And so that uses an extra computer. So I ended up buying, I think, 10 of these Lenovo laptops. And as they got older, the price started coming down. And I think I got some for barely $100. And then I noticed an interesting thing. They started getting rare, and the price started going up for these old computers. And now I'm not sure you can buy this particular model anymore.
I probably missed my window.
Well, for that particular model, but there are always computers that are 10 years old that you can buy real cheap, refurbished. Companies will buy these for all their employees, and they'll use them for a few years, and then they'll dump them onto the market to be resold as refurbished computers. And almost every one of these 10 machines that I bought could pass as brand new machines. As time went on, the real nice machines seemed to dry up, and the last couple they sent me had a little bit of noticeable wear to them. Electronically, they were fine, but you could tell that they were used machines. And so I don't know what I would advise to you if you were going out to do it now, but there are newer models, of course. Lenovo is a good one because it was rugged. So, I would recommend, you don't need anything super great to run a Parks on the Air station in the field. So you should be able to get something in the $100 to $200 range that's 10 years old and refurbished that would meet your needs just fine. But I don't have any specific recommendation.
Clint, it's obvious to everybody that Parks on the Air has been hugely successful. Where do you think it goes from here? What do you think the next 2 or 3, 5 years looks like for Parks on the Air?
Well, it's hard to see how exponential growth can go on for too much longer. Pretty soon, everybody's going to be involved that's interested. But it'll keep getting bigger, and it feeds on itself. There's positive feedback. When you start hearing all these stations on the air calling CQ POTA, it's hard not to work a few of them. And then it's hard, as I did, not to go to the website to see what this is all about. And you discover that having worked a few Parks on the Air station, you've already maybe even won some awards that you didn't even know you were competing for. And so I think more and more people will continue doing that. There will be people like me who are serious about it, who really want to be competitive and want to rise to the high rankings and being either activators or hunters. And I think that's great that they're competitive people. They're people that do it in a relaxed way. They're all over the map. And as a former contester, I find it very interesting, very useful that it's like a contest that goes on round the clock, round the year. Anytime you want to move up in the ranking, you just turn on the rig and you can look at the POTA spots, and there are always a few dozen stations on the air at any given time. And you work a few, and one thing leads to another, and pretty soon you're one of the top activators if you enjoy doing it. And it's kind of hard not to enjoy it. The people are so friendly. There are pileups when someone comes on at a rare park. You may have to wait a few minutes for the big stations to work them before you have your turn. But all of my hunting and activating as well has been done with low power and wire antennas. I've never used more than, well, I do have an amplifier that I've used on occasion, but 90% of my hunting has been done with 100-watt radios and simple wire antennas. I do have a hex beam at both of my home QTHs, which is quite useful. They're not up very high, but it's useful, especially in quick band switching, because you don't have to retune anything. They're resonant on all of the bands 20 and up. Anyway, let's see. This is an answer to your question, where is POTA going? I don't have a crystal ball, but I know it is popular, and the popularity is increasing. And so by extrapolation, I would just think there would be more of the same in the years to come. And I think the POTA Plaque Event is going to turn into a serious contest. In fact, I have a suspicion it's going to replace Field Day for a lot of people. And maybe the ARRL doesn't want to hear that, but Field Day is a domestic contest, and the POTA Plaque Event is an international contest. So there's more and more POTA activity outside the U.S. and Canada, and that will continue to increase as more and more parks gets entered into the system. And so I think the international aspect of it is going to loom very large in coming years. There are so many parks that nobody is going to max out and work all the parks the way they do with DXCC. When I got to about 300 countries in DXCC, I was going a year between a new country, and that got to be no fun. But Parks on the Air, hardly a day goes by when I don't work a new park. Even now that I'm actually the number one all-time hunter in Parks on the Air. But it's still very, very easy to work a new park every day of the year. And that's highly motivating.
You bring up a really good point about the international aspect, the fact that this plaque event is international, and you combine that with the fact that more and more countries are getting on the air, more eligible parks in those countries. It's a lot of fun to turn on the radio and not only talk to some people in the U.S. or some VEs, but to find multiple countries over a period of a week, either calling back or you're hunting them.
Yeah, I think we're very close to the point where one can go to DXCC working 100 country parks. I'm not sure we're quite there yet with enough parks, but it's coming soon. And so that would be an award that someone could certainly work for.
I suspect that'll be on your list. Clint, I appreciate you taking time to be with me today.
Oh, well, the time went so fast. I appreciate your having me, and I appreciate your tolerance of my long-winded answers, which is a thing professors sometimes have a problem with.
Not at all. I very much enjoyed it, and we'll probably have you back here again after the 2023 plaque event.
Okay, I'll do that for you.
I've been talking to Clint Sprott, W9AV. Look for him June 3rd and 4th. He'll be activating a park in Wisconsin. Thank you, Clint.
My pleasure, Kevin.